His mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please do take your seats. We're going to think about that reading from John chapter 2 together for a little while. I'm sure for many of us it's a very familiar reading, Jesus turning water into wine. It's one of those moments, I suppose, in the Gospels that lots of people, even if they don't go to church, will be vaguely familiar with. The amount of times I, as a minister of religion, if I'm pouring water in a restaurant or whatever, someone will say to me, "Oh, you're going to turn that into wine now, Vicar," that kind of thing. You probably don't get that yourself, but you know the sort of experience. It's a familiar story, but have you ever thought about the strangeness of Jesus' reply to his mother? When she comes to him and says they have no, a note of exasperation in Jesus' voice. "Woman." Now, that's probably very unfair. In fact, we'll come and see why it is unfair in just a few minutes. But it's a bit odd that his initial reaction is at least to sort of put some distance between himself and his mother. The rest of the episode, Jesus' mother is described as his mother. But at that moment, Jesus, if you like, backs away from her and just calls her woman. That's a bit strange. Well, so I suppose even stranger is then Jesus then goes on to provide for the very issue that she's brought to his attention. So he says, "Don't involve me, my time has not yet come." And then, almost straight away, he provides this amazing provision of unbelievable quality wine in unbelievable proportions. So, you know, does he have a little bit of a sort of tantrum? Maybe that's a bit too strong. A little bit of kind of exasperation, and so I'll go on then, I'll give you what you're after all. It's easy to read it that way, isn't it? Perhaps he just wanted to have a good time with his friends at a wedding, and you know his mum comes up and says, "Help, we've got a bit of a problem." So, "Oh, no, not right now." And then he said, "Go on then, I'll do it anyway." What's going on? Well, I think actually once you understand that reply, in some ways it unlocks the whole of this episode, because it helps us understand what it means that this miracle that Jesus does in Cana is what John describes as a sign. Did you hear it right at the end of the reading? The first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. Now, the idea of a sign in John's Gospel is a really, really big one. And we know how signs kind of work, sort of signposts in our everyday. I remember when I was a kid, used to travel every now and then to Alton Towers. And the signs for Alton Towers start from miles away. You're heading in the right direction. Alton Towers just a few miles ahead. And you build the anticipation because the signs point beyond themselves to something really, really exciting that's coming up, hopefully, in the case of Alton Towers. At least in the school holidays when maybe the queues were huge, weren't they? But really what John is saying with the sign idea here might be better understood as foretaste. Because, the old, a few miles out of Derby, there was nothing about the sign that made you want to sort of stay there and enjoy it. But the signs in John's Gospel are, if you like, Alton Towers brought forward to the moment where you see the sign. So not just the anticipation, but a real experience of whatever the sign is pointing to. That's how they work in John's Gospel. So here, The sign beyond itself, pointing forward to something in the future, but in itself also an amazing miracle. Now, how does this help us? How does this help us understand Jesus' engagement with his mother and what the point of this story is all about? Well, I think it helps us see, first of all, that Jesus is the route to boundless joy. If you like, that's the big message of this miracle, of this sign. Jesus is the route to boundless joy. It's striking that this is Jesus' first sign, his first real public miracle. It's like his campaign launch. You know, whenever a politician launches their campaign, they'll go somewhere meaningful. They'll go back to their hometown, maybe. They'll go to a school. They'll launch their campaign from that moment. This is Jesus' first big public moment. And he chooses his announcement to be making a party last longer. That's what he wants to do. That's what he wants to say it's all about. Weddings in Jesus' day were already a really big deal. They would have lasted, we think, 7 days or so. The whole community would have come together. Now, the last wedding that I had the privilege of being at, I also got to be the minister at, it was wonderful. It was in the Scottish Highlands, not quite, but in Scotland. And it was a real sense of a community coming together. And people, as they arrived, were piped in by a piper. And everyone enjoyed the moment of old friends coming together. At the reception, I got talking to 2 of the local farmers who'd come in for the occasion. There was a wonderful sense of a community coming together. Even more so in Jesus' day. Jesus and his disciples probably didn't have much connection, but everyone was kind of brought in to be part of this occasion. And in the midst of what was already a big deal, Jesus makes the party go even longer and even better by bringing an unbelievable quantity of the best quality wine that people had ever tasted. If you translate those numbers into, as it were, today's money, we're talking about at minimum 480 litres. That's about 640 bottles of wine. I found out just this week that an Australian winery had made a bottle of wine that big. So 630 kilograms it was, 2.4 meters high, if you want to know. Jesus' opening miracle, his invitation, his sort of stump speech is, here we are, a party that's better than you've ever experienced in your life. Now think about what it means then, that this is only the sign. This is only the signpost pointing beyond itself. If this picture of, bursting at the seams, joy, a party like nothing else, we know that's what a wedding is anywhere in our experience, but a wedding like this, getting even bigger and better, what does it say about what Jesus' glory is all about what it means to know this Jesus? C.S. Lewis put it wonderfully well. In a sermon he preached in Oxford, he started like this: if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. You see the point he's making? Not that drink and sex and ambition are kind of nothings. Of course, they are things that are full of joy, as so much in our life is. But compared to what Jesus offers, if this is just the sign pointing forward, then what Jesus is all about is joy like you've never known before. Joy that bursts your categories of what you thought was possible. Satisfaction, delight, like nothing else. And in fact, there's quite a subtle way that John, if you like, unpacks this point for us. Did you notice the wedding? It happens on the 3rd day. Now, if you follow along in the first few chapters of John, actually, this is the 6th day from the start of Jesus' first week. The way that it works, as they meet, they have the next day, and this the third day. If you know the book of Genesis, that poetic account of the beginning of the world, the sixth day is the day in which, as we thought about with the children, humans are created. And here on this sixth day, Jesus, if you like, saying, sort of, remember what the first creation was all about. Remember what humans were here. That this is a day when humans were made and given a world full of joyful things to enjoy. Actually, in fact, this is what humans were ultimately created for. On this, if you like, new sixth day, they were created to know God and experience unimaginable joy in his presence. So this world that is full of things which bring satisfaction and delight, if you like, are the lower streams. And here in Jesus we meet the fountainhead himself. That's the point. Jesus has no, if you like, blushes, appealing to our desires and saying, you want to get in on what I have to offer you to give you joy. But ask the question, where am I truly going to have my desires, my longings satisfied? So Jesus is the route to boundless joy. But second thing to notice, how do we get this joy? How do we get in on it? And the extraordinary claim, I think, in this scripture, in this episode, is we get the joy by Jesus entering our shame. Because Jesus saves the wedding. That's one of the striking things here, is he really saves the bridegroom from embarrassment. It was the bridegroom's job in Jesus' day, in Palestine in the first century, to provide the food and the drink, to provide the wine. So Jesus steps in and saves the bridegroom from an embarrassing moment, as well as making the party go on and on. But actually, when we start to think about his engagement with his mother again, back to that verse 4, that saving of the bridegroom from embarrassment is actually a clue to the deeper, more extraordinary meaning of this miracle. So that weird answer to his mother, he does put himself at a distance from her. It's like he's saying, I'm not first of all son. You're not first of all my mother. Of course, that is true as a human being. Here is a mother and son having a conversation. But there's if you like, a more significant, a primary identity that Jesus has in John's Gospel. Not as the son of Mary, but as the son, capital S, of the Father. The beginning of John's Gospel, what's called the prologue, we hear it every year at our 9 lessons and carols. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That extraordinary, another poem, if you like, explaining the cosmic significance of Jesus Christ. At this moment, if you like, Jesus refers back to that, sort of subtly, by saying, woman, I'm not first of all your son, I'm the son of the Father. The next time Jesus will use this language of woman is actually on the cross itself, when he looks down from the cross and provides for his mother. But again, he calls a woman there. So I don't think it's first of all a kind of statement of exasperation, but it is saying, I'm at a distance from you. I'm not first of all your son, I'm the son of the Father instead. And in fact, that language about my hour has not yet come, that language of hour, in John's Gospel again, is pointing forward to the crucifixion, the cross where Jesus is going to die. So you have this extraordinary moment. If you like, the plot thickens in the way that this episode at least is told. He distances himself from his mother. He says, I'm first of all the son of the Father. And even in the midst of this wedding, I'm thinking about my death. My hour has not yet come. In the midst of all this, I'm thinking about the moment when I'm going to die. How does this work? What's Jesus doing in this interaction? Well, think about the first point. Jesus is the route to boundless joy. How is it that we are going to return to the source of our joy How is it that we're going to move away from making mud pies to enjoying the holiday at the sea? How are we going to get in on this extraordinary invitation? In John's Gospel, the route back home, if you like, is the route back to belonging to God, to coming into his family, to being welcomed by him into his arms. That is where this overflowing wine picture finds its fulfillment. To be a child of God, to know him, to belong to him, is where all our created being finds its, if you like, consummation, its fulfillment. And the only way that we can come home to God is if Jesus goes out into the far, far country. The only way for us to get in on this infinite joy that he offers us is if he enters the shame of our existence. Not just the shame of a bridegroom who hasn't got enough wine for the wedding, but the shame of our situation as it truly is before God. The shame, in fact, that Aslan spoke about to Prince Caspian. We are children of Lord Adam and Lady Eve, and that is dignifying. But precisely because we haven't lived up to that high and noble status as human beings, it is also shame enough to bow all of our heads, that we've lived in God's world and not honored him as such, not recognized him as the giver of all these things. So if you like, what Jesus says here to his mother is something like this: I can save this wedding. Of course I can, and I will. But for me to truly save this couple, this wedding party, each one of us is going to take much more than just working a miracle with this water. It's going to take Jesus himself going to the cross and bearing all the consequences of our rejection of God and our deserved punishment by God himself. That's why he's thinking about the cross even at this moment. Now, it might seem strange or difficult that we can sort of bring together the idea of Jesus being this extraordinary figure of joy and fulfillment and also this figure of pain and suffering. But isn't that true to our lives? There are moments of extraordinary joy we experience in the course of life. They sometimes come and you don't realize it. But one of the things about our lives that we may be more aware about post-COVID than ever is just how fragile everything is. Pain lurks right alongside contentment and joy. And loads of philosophers have said that real, true, deep contentment often lies on the far side of adversity and difficulty. But here's the extraordinary thing about Jesus Christ. If you like, he says to us, I will experience the deepest adversity that you could imagine so that you can experience joy unimaginable. And so that even the darkest valley that you might be going through right now, it isn't leading you away from me, but it is my route for you to come home to me. Because I have done everything needed for you to come home, and I will carry you even through that most painful experience. As we come in a few moments to the Lord's Supper, will you receive that token in bread and wine of God's commitment and love to you, so that whatever you go through now, unimaginable joy is coming as you belong to him as his child? Let's take a few moments to respond in quiet, and then Saskia will come and lead us in some prayers of intercession.